Adam's not back.
What's that? He'll be back in
5 minutes. He just ran off. He'll be right back. Okay. We'll start as soon as he's back, though.
Yeah.
Okay. There he is. Hey, welcome back, Adam.
Nice of you to join us, Adam.
So can we go ahead and get started?
Really appreciate it.
Fantastic. All right, I have to do the thing.
Which thing?
The thing. Hey, everybody. Jason here. Thank you for coming out this morning to Wavedash Games talk on character design. So I'm here with a couple of the staffers. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Wesley Ruddle, and in the Smash scene I was known as Mogwai, and I am a senior game designer on Wavedash Games, which means that I work on character design and then some combat and systems design as well.
Hi, I'm Adam Oliver. Some of you might know me by my gamer tag, Strongbad. I am a game designer at Wavedash Games. I have a lot of experience working on platform fighters, and I work directly on characters and combat.
Hey everyone, my name is Keenan Lafferty. I'm a senior concept artist here at Wavedash Games. I'm in charge of doing some of the promo art that you can see up there, as well as concepting new characters.
All right, so let's jump in. So when we talk about character design, there's a bunch of different methodologies that game companies use. And for us, one of the things we talk about internally, this is the only thing we do, but one of the things we talk about internally is the difference between top-down and bottom-up game design. So if you're at our talk last year here at SmashCon, we talked about this a little bit, so I'm just going to briefly run through it real fast. Top-down game design is the process where you start with a theme or a concept. You start with a big idea, and then you work your way down from that into the actual game mechanics, moves, the actual individual expressions of moves. Bottom up is the other way around. So bottom up, you're starting with a suite of moves or a concept mechanically, and then you work your way up from there into visual design. So you actually see this used a lot and talked about a lot in game design circles. Riot Games uses it sometimes. I've heard it from designers at Blizzard. In particular, kind of most famously, Wizards of the Coast uses it a lot for Magic the Gathering. So we're going to give you a couple of examples today. We're going to talk about Zana and talk about Raymer, both of whom you can play today at our booth. We're going to be open from 12 to 3 p.m. But we're going to talk about the design process for each of them. So Wes here was the designer that was focused on Zana. So we're going to kick it over to him and let him talk a little bit about bottom-up design.
Yep. So on Zana, we were starting from a mechanical gameplay idea and not necessarily from a concept. So this is why it's like a bottom-up design process. And what we were really shooting for was the character archetype of a grappler. So when you're starting with something like that, you generally try to find some sort of marquee move that you are then building the kit around. And in Zana's case, we knew as a grappler, we wanted like her marquee move to be a grab. So we built out command grab moves based on various things that have worked in other games, and eventually landed on what her side special is now, the lunging choke slam move. And we started to kind of build out the kit from there, and what we had seen work before in other games on these heavy grappler types. So we kind of focused on the things that we've already seen in that space. They were like slower, more powerful wind-up moves, the sorts of things that you'd see on, your heavies, your Bowsers, your Zangiefs, your Hugos, all of those sorts of characters. And what we found is that this wasn't really working in our game. A lot of what was happening is the character was focusing on single big hits, whereas the genre and the pace of game that we were going for is more about stringing together like longer juggles, and something didn't feel right when it was just about, I'm going to hit you 4 times with command grab and that's going to be your stock. It just didn't quite feel right. We wanted there to be more decisions in the combo game, and so as we started building out the character, it was like, you know what, the things that have worked in other games are not working for us. We're not able to make a character who cohesively makes sense in the game. So we kept iterating on mechanics and started to like speed her up and work on like more athletic, flashy designs for her moves that let her get hitboxes out quicker and string together longer strings, so that there was more opportunity for players to sort of DI between hits and make there be like more tension and build up before she got a giant hit. So as we're building this out, the kit started to really come together, and it was proving out that it was not. We had been using reference for characters like Hulk and Hugo and Zangief, these big hulking brawlers, and we started to transition more into like athletic points of reference, stuff like Alex, stuff like pro wrestling, just like these guys who are still exuding strength and confidence, but are more about quick athletic motions. It's more of a super athlete and less of like a force of nature, raw, unchecked, unbridled power, and more of like, I have trained so much for combat and am so comfortable with how my body moves that I can get attacks out quick that still look and feel incredibly powerful. And then I'm gonna kick it over to Keenan to talk about how that impacted her visual design.
Sure, thanks Wes. So I'll be reiterating some of the points brought up to me by Michael Marino. He was one of the lead concept artists on this. But as we were talking about earlier, we had the design and the mechanics for Xana laid out early on in development, and then we had to create a visual design to sort of match what we were going for. And all the while we were developing the story that she would be a celebrity from her home planet, and because of that, as you can see up on some of the concept art over there, some of the top 3 that are featured there, they have furs and things that feel more barbaric-like. And we wanted Xana to be more refined and look like she comes from, you know, like a celebrity background from wrestling on her planet. And overall just convey her character and personality through that. Something that really helps when we're developing these characters is think of keywords. And some of the ones that Marino brought up were big, bold, and beautiful. So we were trying to make that come through with her final design. So that'll wrap up how we design from bottom up. Now we have an example of how we will design from top down. So I'll kick it over to you guys.
Yeah, so one of the things I want to jump in on here before we kick it over to Adam to talk about kind of the top-down design on Raymer was one of the benefits of our design process is it lets us iterate pretty quickly. We had a version of Xana in the game over a year ago, but it was kind of this blocky model. We were using off-the-shelf animations. We were hacking together a prototype version of the character so we could really start to understand who the character was. And then when Wes joined the team, he really got in there and really started kind of focusing on the personality of the character. And then because we're in 3D, because we developed a lot of tools early on that let the designers work very quickly. We were able to iterate quickly. So it made this bottoms-up process actually a lot less painful than it could have been because we were focused on that iterative design process. So now we're going to jump over to Raymer, who is Reno's favorite character in the game right now. I really love playing him, but Adam led the design on that character, so I thought we'd let Adam talk a little bit about how a top-down design process works.
Yeah, so unlike with Xana, which was bottom-up, where you start with a mechanic and then build the context around that, for Raymer, we did it top-down, which means we start with like a big picture, a concept, and then we fill in the context later. So what we wanted to do was build an anime-inspired gunslinger akin to Cowboy Bebop's Spike Spiegel or Bash the Stampede. And that was the big idea we started with. And we kicked it over to artists to kind of iterate on the visual design, and then like allowed the visual design to influence how we built the gameplay. So I'm actually going to kick it over to Keenan here to discuss Raymer's concepting.
Sure, yeah. So Raymer was a ton of fun because now we get to start with the visual design, which is of course my specialty. And I was actually happy to start the concept work on Raymer. And similar to how I talked about keywords, our keywords for Raymer were much more simple. It was anime, gun, and hair. So we needed to get all 3 of those points done. And I had a lot of fun. As you can see, these are some of the early designs of what I was thinking for Raymer. And pretty early, we were able to hammer down a silhouette that was going to read clearly from the game. Also, another thing that you guys might realize is that when we're concepting, we start in black and white. And the reason why we do that is because, first of all, it speeds up the process. We don't have to worry about exactly what colors are going to be there. We can focus solely on values, and that's a fancy word for, is this character going to read from close up as well as far away in our game platform. So, yeah, I think that is, we can move on to the next slide, because that is just some more iteration on the visual style. Once we hammered down the silhouette of the character and how it was going to read from the game, we then start going in there and figuring out the real details, like, okay, what are the cuts of fabric going to be that will allow Raymer's jacket to hold his guns, because that was another thing that we really wanted to make sure that came through in the final design. He wanted to have these huge holsters on his chest and the jacket to be made to look like it was basically made to hold those holsters. So that about wraps it up on my side. Do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, go for it. We're on the next slide already.
Okay. So this slide also has the final design of Raymer, as you can see. And after we got the final concept for Raymer, that allowed me as a designer to build the gameplay around his visual style. So we also added more context to his personality. Unlike other gunslingers you might know of, he doesn't care too much for morality. He's very skilled, and he works for the highest bidder. And that helps us build his silhouette in terms of like his idle animation and his walk. It makes him be a little more aloof and not be as like active as you might expect from a similar character. So what I did was I took a look at the visual style and what type of players would want to play this type of character. And what I kind of came to the conclusion of was that players wanted to feel skillful as Raymer is. And so we introduced the ricochet shot, which players are able to aim the gun, and it bounces off floors and the bottom of platforms. And that basically allows the player to feel like they're skillful. It allows them to feel clever. It's very important that the player feels like it's not Raymer's gun that's skillful, it's Raymer himself, and that the player has to embody that and be skillful instead of the ability for the player to make a mistake is very important here. We took a lot of looks at source material for animation influence, not even attacks, but also how is Raymer supposed to walk, how is he supposed to run, how does he jump, and making all those animations fit within this theme was very important to us. And that's basically what I've got for Raymer. You got anything to add, Jason?
No, I think you hit on some really important points, particularly the kind of the style and personality. The last thing that I would bring up is that top-down versus bottom-up is not a purely linear process. We have to go back and make tweaks all the time to make sure that the character feels like it really should in the game. So some examples there on both fronts. With Zana here, I'm going to run back up. You'll notice in the concept art on the lower side, Zana's neck is a little bit longer and more slender in these kind of lower concepts. And we thought that would make her look and feel a little bit more elegant in the concept art. We really liked it, but once we modeled it and got it into game, and started animating her, we started to realize that the longer neck actually made it harder for us to really express her power. And it made her look a little bit silly when she was doing some of the big athletic moves that Wes was working on. So I actually went back and we shortened her neck and we changed the proportions a little bit to better align with kind of the character personality, the character design that we had come up with. On the Raymer side, Adam talks about getting this personality into the character. And so we spent a lot of time actually watching anime and passing videos around the office, talking about different gunslinger moves and all of that. So once we had this visual design, we actually did go, we were coming top down, but then we had to get this stuff into the game and say, this thing doesn't feel right, or this thing feels better this way. And so we started doing a little bit more bottom-up design to try and coalesce the design in a spot that really made sense. Because we had gotten personality, but now we needed to get gameplay to really feel right. As I said, game design is a very iterative process. You guys can play the game here.
Yes.
Yeah, you can play it here today for a few hours and give us feedback. But these characters are very close to done, but we might go back based on feedback that we're getting from our audience, based on what people are seeing on our streams, playing here at the con. and go back and make some more tweaks. So if it's something that you're really passionate about, if you have some big ideas, make sure to play it and take one of our surveys at the end and let us know what you think. Cool, so we wanted to kind of speed run that a little bit, get you guys some big ideas, give you a glimpse at how top-down versus bottom-up game design would work. But then we know we get a lot of questions on Twitter, on Discord, in the booth, and while we had this stage, we wanted to give you all an opportunity to ask some questions. I'm not sure how they're doing questions here, if they're doing it on the mic or not.
He's got it, right there.
But, oh, yeah, we got somebody with a mic coming down the aisle here. So if you have a question for us, feel free to throw up your hand. We'll try and answer them as best as we can. I think we got somebody over here.
What would you say is the hardest or least interesting part of the visual aspect of character design?
I heard
I'm
visual
sorry.
aspect.
We can't hear the question very well over the crowd noise.
Can you turn it up a little bit? Can you turn up the mic for the person asking the question?
Yes, turn up the mic volume a little bit. We can't hear what he said.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
All right. What is that? All right? Can you hear me?
A little bit. Maybe I should go there.
Let's give it a try. Speak loud.
All right. What would you say is the hardest or most least interesting part of the visual aspect of character design?
That's a question for Keenan. What's the hardest aspect?
Okay, so the hardest part and the best parts of visual design of a character. That's what you're saying? Cool. So let's see. So the funnest parts come from, I mean, there's definitely, yes, pros and cons to each. So let me start with Xana. So the team comes to me, or in this case, Marino, and they say, okay, guys, we've got this idea for our grappler character. We wanted to do this and this and this. We've got a little bit of our story lined out and how we want the character to feel in the game. Well, that allows us to very quickly throw down our concepts and quickly agree on a visual style for the character. And that can be a lot of fun because obviously it makes our jobs a lot easier. But at the same time, it might be limiting a little bit more of our creative freedom. And then on the other end of the spectrum, a character like Raymer, where we're like, okay, we don't know anything about how this character is going to work in the game. We just want something that looks cool. That's something where us as visual designers, we can have a lot more fun with. And we can just let our minds run wild, and then we can kind of dial it in to the final bit there. So that's a little bit of the pros and cons of the visual design side of it. Thank you.
Wes, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think from a gameplay perspective, one of the hardest things is ensuring that characters have unique silhouettes that read discernibly different from everyone else. So like finding, like, especially as you expand the roster, right now it's not particularly difficult for us just because we're still building out the roster. But as games get larger, silhouette is like a super important piece of players seeing a character and instantly recognizing who they are. And so you need to always make sure that you're like getting key points on the silhouette that read distinctly from all the rest of the cast, which gets pretty difficult as you expand to a much larger roster.
Anything you want to add, Adam?
I'm good. I think you guys covered everything.
Yeah, I think on my front, the hardest part is waiting to get the character in game and finally play them once we have a design we like. There's definitely a challenge sometimes where we're all like very creative people and we've got big ideas, but we kind of have to nudge ourselves back into certain product goals sometimes. Where we might have a really cool idea for a hulking style move that Xana could do, but and it might even feel good when we're prototyping it, but if it doesn't align with the overall character design that we're working on, sometimes we need to take good ideas and subtract them, remove them from the design so that in the end the total design can be better. And I think we did that quite a bit with Xana, and I think it's reflected on the show floor. She's been one of like the most favorite characters for a lot of people that came through the booth. So sometimes being willing to kill things or remove things that you think are cool because they don't fit the overall goal of the character can be really difficult and painful, but it's really satisfying once it's in the game and it feels good. Cool. I think we got some questions over on this side. Let's make sure to repeat the question into the mic if you are streaming it, because they might not be listening.
Oh, okay, sure. Hello. Just a few questions about about icons in general. I can see that you guys have like a big impact, want to have a big impact on like esports and stuff like that. How do you think your character design seems to be building off of similar games with like similar impact, like Dota and League of Legends? How do you think they have inspired you in a way, and how do you think that their design for like esports in general is helping you guys design your characters?
That's great.
Yeah, so the first point is we don't get to decide whether our game is an esport or not. All we get to do is work our hardest to make a fun, fair, and competitive multiplayer experience. And then we put it in the hands of the community, and you guys get to decide whether we're an esport or not. You are the ones that decide whether you're going to show up to tournaments, whether you're going to host locals, whether you're going to play online. So y'all are the ones that get to decide where the game goes. And that's why Wavedash is so focused on working with the community. Why we've been going to events since we had a very early demo of the game, been playtesting with very high-level players and community leaders to get feedback early on. What we want to make sure is that we stay true to our vision for the product and the intellectual property that we're developing, the characters and all of that, but at the same time we're listening to the audience and we continue to iterate, like we talked about, to make things better. In terms of designing the characters to be esports ready, I don't know, Wes, you might have the most experience with this out of all of us. Do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. The industry buzzword I would use to describe all of them is aspirational. Basically the idea that all of these games are trying to make characters that you look at and you'd be like, oh man, I want to be like that. It takes a lot of cues from like comics and superheroes and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I guess that's the common thread I'm seeing between all the games that you're listing out there, where it's just, I guess all of these games are trying to design characters who feel very heroic and like they could like belong in kind of an eclectic universe. I think, like honestly, you can start to trace it all the way back to the Avengers when people are starting to like bring together all of these things and feel like you can bring different worlds together, because that was one where they're like, oh man, here's Thor who lives in like crazy Norse mythology, and Iron Man who's like in, you know, modern technology. And I think that for the sake of diversity of cast, having those sorts of worlds where all these different styles are meshing together and work, like that's really empowering as a designer, because you can do something where it feels like you have like a medieval character next to a sci-fi character, and you can kind of appeal to all the different types of things that people want to play. So I think you can trace it all the way back to there, because they sort of figured out a formula that works for that, and I think everyone's trying to sort of build off of that base of like, oh, let's go in that sort of like, let's make superheroes, let's make cool characters who players want to be and get really excited by it.
Yeah. Great.
I'd also like to quickly add to, you were talking about impact and how we are inspired by other AAA companies to have our characters make an impact visually. And one of the things that I've noticed from places like Riot Games and Blizzard Entertainment is that their characters are all, they give you these characters that are very interesting visually, but they're not always necessarily spelling out what their story is or even necessarily what they represent. You as a player can go in there and do research yourself, but oftentimes we end up making the story for ourselves and making the character our own. And us as visual designers, we want to convey all the nuances of the design and the character's motives and style from the moment that you see them, and allow you to sort of make your own story and make the story, or make the character your own. So that's what we're trying to do with our characters as well. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. We've got questions there and there. I'm not sure what we should. Sure. We've got a couple that we want to get back to over here as well.
Hi, so I was wondering, do you have any plans for like a story mode of some type, or if not just like a singular story mode, but maybe like story mode for specific characters?
So right now we're really focused on shipping the core game. We want to make sure that we get a good sized cast of really fun and exciting characters. But Wavedash as a studio in general has a firm belief that there's a lot of kind of unexplored design space in the platform fighter genre. Not just in character design, but in terms of single player content, cooperative content, etc. So right now, there's nothing in development. We've got some ideas on whiteboards and scratch pads and in Google Docs places for where we want to go next. But first thing we need to do is get the core multiplayer game out. And then while we're in beta, we're going to start exploring opportunities to do, like I said, single player cooperative content, stuff that you could speed run, those sorts of things. But it's not likely to happen this year. It'll be something we start developing probably next year. But it's on our radar.
Great. I think this guy's been waiting. These two have been waiting for a little while. So.
Making the man walk.
Hey, how are we doing on time? We good on time?
Good. Yeah, cool.
So when you're prototyping your game, how complete does a character need to be to start iterating off of them and get a sense of how they actually play? Like, what stage might it be when you could consider it alpha or like something that's visual and tangible for you guys?
I think it varies a lot from character to character. It depends on like what the key hook on the character is. So like, if it's something that we haven't done before and that we need like a big tech request to do something that we've never done before to like for the character to even feel like themselves, we can't really start playtesting them until that's in because it doesn't feel like a complete character, like our vision's being represented and that we're getting anything particularly valuable off of. But if we are working off of more tried and true ideas, we can start playtesting them earlier on. So like for Zurong, for instance, I think we were able to start playtesting fairly early on because we're staying within pretty well-known space there. Whereas a character like Raymer, we can't really playtest them until we have the ricochet shot because that's like kind of the whole hook and awesome thing that we want people to feel and like play around with the most. But yeah, it just varies a lot from character to character right now.
One of the things I'd point out is because we're developing in 3D, we're able to do a lot of animation sharing when we're prototyping characters. So oftentimes when we want to kind of sketch out a new character and kind of start getting them stood up in the client, we'll take their game model or a generic game model or something like that, and then we will hook it up with animations from other characters, and then we'll tweak the properties of those so we can playtest them. So as Wes said, though, it varies from character to character, right? So we had a very rough early version of Zana this time last year in the build, but she was pretty broken, but she kind of gave us an idea of do we want to do hulking, do we want to do athletic, do we want to do those sorts of things, where, like Wes said, somebody like Raymer, much harder to get a feel for the character early on. We really needed the tech to express that. So the nice thing is, as the tech is developed for us and animations start coming in, we can have a lot of placeholder animations. So for instance, Raymer, when he was in development, he had a lot of like he had Ashani's tech, and he had Ashani's get-up attack, and a couple of Ashani's aerials until those animations were done. But we started to get a sense of who the character was once we had Ricochet shot in and started experimenting with that. Adam, anything you would want to add to that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Cool.
Sweet.
This guy's been waiting a while, and then keep moving.
Yeah. Thanks, Wes.
Yeah, no problem.
Good team.
Hey, so I actually have two different questions. So the first question I wanted to ask is, what's the whole story for the world of Icons? Because I actually do want to know like why all these people are here.
Yay, creative director question. So Icons is set in a universe where there are these portals that we're not explaining right now, but portals that connect sentient life all over the galaxy. And the Icons are joining what is essentially a fighting league that is the #1 entertainment export of this universe. So think about it this way. If you're on the planet of the slugs, you guys probably don't play soccer. And if you are from the planet of the big dumb giants, you probably don't play chess. But every being across the universe that's subject to the rules of evolution understands combat, understands struggling for survival. So everybody throughout the entire universe can understand combat as an entertainment product, and so hence the Fighting League and all of these characters coming together from different worlds and different universes to compete together. So I won't tell too much more of the lore because we want to reveal that stuff to you over the course of the next year as we're rolling out the product and we're giving you much better supplementary stuff. It's better for you to see it than for me to tell it to you, but that's kind of the core conceit, that all of these people are coming together to compete, to be the icons of their home world and represent their people and their fighting style or their own interests as a fighter in this broader universe. Cool? Awesome.
And then second question is, balance-wise, how do you guys want to go? Do you want to go for like an ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom where everybody's going to end up being overpowered and just ridiculous? Or do you want to go for like a melee high tiers for everybody, or just like a big mix?
Adam, you're in charge of character tuning. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is actually a really good question. There's a lot of different ways you can approach this. As a designer, the most important thing to me to do at the beginning is to make somebody like their character. And then at the end, balancing how good characters are in relation to each other comes later. So what this usually ends up happening is that characters are reasonably powerful, but they aren't powerful to the point where you have this one thing that beats the other character just because they happen to be a certain archetype. We want characters to be balanced, but there's only so much balance you can do. And it's definitely more important that players like their characters. If everybody is like mid-tier, like a melee mid-tier, then your game may or may not be very exciting, and players might not like their character very much to stick around and put hundreds of hours into being good at that character.
Great. I think we've got some more questions over this way.
Yeah, this guy. When it comes to designing a new character, do you focus on individuality among your cast, or do you feel it's more important to make your character more accessible to fans of like Smash Brothers games, for example, like how some characters might feel similar to Fox or Marth or Captain Falcon?
Great question, yeah.
Yeah, good question. So we knew from the beginning of this project that we wanted to give you all a mix of familiar and fresh. In fact, if you look at, again, like kind of game design theory, people talking about this stuff in industry talks, Blizzard has like an 80-20 rule, where pretty much anything they create is 80% familiar and 20% fresh. I don't think we're going to skew quite that hard, but what we wanted was in the early cast to have a couple of characters that felt like home. They felt comfortable, that you could just kind of come over, and they'll help you understand how our game is different from the other games in the genre, because they're very similar to something you've played before. But then what we want to do there, as we said, like, there's a lot of unexplored design space. So there's lots of opportunities to do cool stuff like putting a grappler into the genre, or giving somebody a ricochet shot that bounces off the bottom of platforms. It can bounce 6 times. There's lots of fun stuff that we can do there as we continue to explore stuff. But having a couple of characters and a couple of ideas that feel familiar and help you kind of, there's a term we use in game design called grok, G-R-O-K, and it kind of means intuitively understand. So having a couple of characters that let you kind of quickly grok the difference between our game and other ones and start to feel comfortable with the mechanics very quickly was an important part of the design process. But now that we've gotten there, there's a lot of opportunity for us to explore new character designs. And I think these guys have a lot of cool ideas for where we're going to go next with characters. And you know, that's not to say that we might not touch on some archetypes that are very familiar to you, but we want to do them in our own way. Wes, Adam, anything you guys would want to add?
Not really. I mean, again, it just varies from character to character. A lot of times characters start from an individual idea that just feels missing from the game, and sometimes that's a mechanic, sometimes it's an archetype, sometimes it's just a visual style. And so, you know, different ones are going to come from different places, and they might feel more or less familiar based on where that is. But we hope that we're giving you, on the whole, something that's eclectic and gives everyone characters that they can attach to and get really excited about.
Cool. Yeah, the only other thing I would say, kind of as a teaser, is we've kind of already talked about the next character we're hoping to reveal. One that we're working on right now is our duo character. We are currently working on that. That's Wes's character. We're really excited about them, but mechanically they're different than any duo that you've seen before. So we're gonna learn from and borrow from what we've seen in the genre already. But this is an example of a character where we started kind of bottom up. Came up with a really cool mechanical idea for how they were going to function, and then started stacking other stuff on top of it. Now that we've got kind of a visual and stylized theme, we're working our way back down through the design tree to create a move and a kit that all feels coherent for the whole design. So sometimes that bottom up, top down is actually a circle. And it seems to be something Wes in particular is really good at. So we let him help guide us on that process, and we're having a lot of fun with it. So you will see some archetypes that you're familiar with coming up soon, but they're going to be their own take, and they're going to be a lot of fun.
Cool. We've got time for one more question.
Let's go in the back then.
How hard is it to stop characters from feeling like samey, kind of like Fox and Falco and Melee, how they're similar? Like, to what degree do you put into the design process to make characters unique?
Sure. So a lot of it is based on the visual style of the character, and the second part is that we tend not to share animations between characters. We're currently building out vastly different archetypes, characters from different worlds. We don't really have a reason to share a ton of animations like the quote-unquote Smash clones. We may do a less exaggerated form of a clone of one of our characters in the future, but we have the resources, we have the design space for quite a while that we don't really have a need to share a bunch of animations or the same visual design for a character. Even characters that come from the same world are drastically different that we're working on right now.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that a lot of the Melee clones run into is that they, their core identifying moves are frequently the same. So like Fox and Falco are both very much defined by Shine, and even if Shine, works in different ways off of those characters, sort of how they get from neutral into the core of their game is very similar. So I think that even if you end up with moves that sort of might end up looking the same, as long as you're building a cohesive kit that's built very differently around them, you can end up with things that feel more differentiated than we've seen elsewhere. That being said, as Adam said, we have a ton of space to not need to end up recycling moves like that. Frequently that's a move that you make when you kind of run out of resources and you need to deliver a game. But since we're doing constant updates to our game, I think that we'll hold ourselves to a bar where we won't want to ship something that feels samey and feels like a copy-pasted moveset.
Actually, on that note, can we bring up the slides again real fast? I've got one more thing I want to show off. So Keenan was, as we were wrapping up the slide deck yesterday, he was like, if we get a chance, I want to talk about Zurong. So we'll put some of her stuff in here. So I just wanted to bring up, in response to this question, all the way on the right here, you can see some movement studies. And when we're doing these, it's helping us understand the way a character should move, and what types of silhouettes they're going to create with their attacks. And it helps us make sure that we're differentiating before we start the animation process. So we're not always going to have everything's going to be exactly opposite. There's only so many ways somebody can throw a punch. So you might see an animation where Ashani throws a punch and Raymer throws a punch, and they're kind of similar, because that's going to happen. But doing these character studies with awesome character artists like Keenan and Mike and our art director Josh really help us understand the way a character should move and should help us differentiate them a little bit more. Yeah, and just to wrap up, Keenan, is there anything that you wanted to express about the character design process, looking at the Zurong art here? Anything you wanted to talk about real fast before we wrap up, kind of as a bonus?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to touch on a few similar questions that we've been receiving, and that is, a lot of the characters feel very similar to something from Melee, and why would you do that? What's the benefit to doing that? And really the reason is that there's pros and cons to each type of design. Whereas Zurong here, you can see a lot of the animation studies were very inspired by Marth's. And being able to put a character like that in the game, the pros that I see from that are someone can come directly from Melee, specifically someone like me that enjoyed Marth, and pick up our game and be very comfortable with it. But of course, the cons are that once you get past the novelty of like, this is very comfortable, I feel just like I'm playing another character from another game, we might be missing an opportunity to delve a little bit deeper into what makes Zurong unique. Similar to what I was talking about earlier with characters having impact, or the question that was asked earlier was really good. So those are all things that we are considering as we move forward. But the ultimate design goal is that our characters hit that nice balance point of feeling familiar, yet they stand on their own.
Great. So thank you all for coming out. I think that is it for us. And we'll be back at SmashCon next year, I'm sure. We love this place, and we hope you all come back too. And if you get a chance, swing by our booth. I think they're going to start setting up here shortly, or they might already be set up, so you guys can play some more. And leave us some feedback and let us know what you want. And we've got these cool pop sockets for your phone. They can work as a stand if you fill something out. They're actually really fun. We all really like them. So check it out, grab a pop socket, have some fun, and come chat with us. Oh, and sign up on icons.gg for the beta.